Let's cross to the UK now and catch up with the editor of Spiked Online, Brendan O'Neill. Great to talk to you, Brendan, again. This must be a real time of crisis in the UK because not only are you battling this pandemic, but Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, not only in hospital but in intensive care.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary state of affairs. It really is uncharted territory for the UK, or for any country in modern times, in fact. We're going through this incredibly serious health crisis, and the man who's been leading us through it quite well, in my view, is now in intensive care, which presumably means he is quite ill. I think we'll find out more today, but the coronavirus cases that get moved to intensive care tend to be very serious ones. So it's deeply concerning. It feels very disorientating. I think a lot of ordinary Britons just feel deeply worried and uncertain about the future. We felt fairly uncertain anyway, but I think we feel it more so now because of what's happening to Boris Johnson. So it's a worrying state of affairs. I hope we get more information today. And of course, everyone in this country is willing Boris through this, and they want him back on the front line.
He's such an energetic and positive character, and that's part of, I suppose, his shtick in leading the nation through this pandemic. He's been talking about how grave the challenge is, but he's been positive about it. Now, of course, that I suppose amplifies the blow of him being in intensive care. And of course, in his mid-50s, a bloke in his mid-50s, he's getting into that age group and that gender that are most vulnerable to this disease.
That's right, and that's what makes it quite concerning. But you're right. He's an energetic person. He's led the country well so far. And let's not forget, he's one of the most enthusiastically elected prime ministers of modern times. He got a huge mandate in the December general election, particularly from vast swathes of the working classes who were just sick of the Labour Party, and they really put their trust in Boris to lead us, particularly through Brexit, but to lead the country more broadly. So this is a blow to democracy too, because the person who we put in charge to run things through the current period is no longer able to do that, and he's now deputising to the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab. So it's very worrying. I think it raises lots of questions, firstly and most clearly about Boris's health, but also about what's going to happen in terms of politics and what this means for democracy and the democratic mandate that we gave to Boris. But I think the key thing is, I think there's so much goodwill for Boris at the moment. There's a huge amount of support for him. And I think the nation will rally behind him enormously over the next few days and really will want him to get better and to get back in charge as soon as he can.
Yeah, let's hope so. Tell us about the rate of infection and the death toll in the UK at the moment. We've seen reports of temporary morgues being put into use, of squads going out now to help collect bodies for those people who are dying at home. It's very dire.
It's a very serious situation. We're in a far worse situation than Australia. There are now more than 5,000 deaths. It's incredibly serious. It looks like the measures we are taking are starting to work. It's early days, but that's what people are hoping, and that's what the experts are saying. So I'm hoping that's true. There are so many questions to consider at the moment. Firstly, there is the pressing health crisis of coronavirus, which we are all tackling in our own way. There's also the issue of the lockdown and how much longer the lockdown can go on, because there are now numerous expert voices, including expert voices who advise the government, who are saying, listen, this lockdown can't go on for much longer because it is also impacting on people's health. It is also impacting on their health via the loss of jobs, forcing people to stay indoors for long periods of time. I think we have to now start thinking, even though it's a difficult question, we have to start thinking about getting the balance right between fighting the health crisis of coronavirus without creating a new health crisis via the lockdown. And that's going to be the difficult balancing act that the government's got to think about in the coming weeks.
There's no doubt about that, and even in Australia, where we've seemed to have suppressed the disease a lot earlier, touch wood, because there's a long way to go, but you've got to get that balance right between making sure that the cure here isn't worse than the disease, because the shutdown is causing enormous economic and social strife. Just on that, you would have heard my editorial about the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland and the Health Minister in New Zealand. It won't be a surprise to you, of all people, that the political elites think they can operate by different rules.
So much hypocrisy in those two cases in particular. The Scottish medical officer has been sacked, essentially resigned, because she was driving to her second home when we're not supposed to be doing those kinds of things. You know, I think there's a real class dynamic to the lockdown. In fact, there's so much complaining among Britain's middle-class media and upper-middle-class political set about ordinary people going to the park or ordinary people cycling around. I find there's a lot of hypocrisy on that, because not many people have gardens. People often live in small flats, crowded flats with lots of children or elderly relatives. I think it's right that people are allowed to go out once a day for their exercise. I think any clampdown on the rule of going out once a day for exercise would be terrible. It would mean that people were cooped up for long periods of time, and that would be very unhealthy. The way I see it is that if you are enjoying the lockdown, then you probably are quite a privileged person. You probably live in a big house with a nice garden and you can work from home and you're very well connected. But I'm thinking about older people who might not be on the internet, young mums with 3 or 4 kids who live in small flats. We do have to think about the impact that the lockdown is having on those sections of society. So as much as we can, we should allow these people to go out once a day. And we should call out the hypocrisy of medical officers and politicians who seem to think that the lockdown rules don't apply to them at all.
Brendan, thanks for talking to us. Stay well yourself, and here's hoping for a quick recovery from Boris.
Thanks, Chris.